Hello, happy believers. The book of Ruth is about the lives of Naomi, Ruth, and Boaz. Naomi and her husband, Elimelech, had 2 sons married to Ruth and Orpah. There was a famine in the land, and in search of food, they travelled and settled in Moab. Naomi's husband died, and then 10 years later, both her sons died. She was left only with 2 daughters-in-law. Naomi decided to leave Moab. Naomi said to Orpah and Ruth not to journey with her, as they would have a better life if they stayed behind. Orpah decided not to go, but Ruth clung to Naomi. When Naomi saw that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped trying to persuade her to stay. Naomi and Ruth travelled until they came to Bethlehem. Ruth's husband died a young man, and so did Naomi's, and also her 2 sons. She experienced a lot of tragedy, and now she had to leave her own home due to a famine and lack of food. It seemed to have been one thing after another for her. Naomi decided to change her name. She said, "Do not call me Naomi. Call me Mara," which means bitterness, because the Almighty has dealt quite bitterly with me. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? After all, the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has afflicted me. When they arrived in Bethlehem, it was the beginning of the barley harvest. Naomi had a relative on her husband's side, a prominent man of noble character, whose name was Boaz. Finding work, Ruth went out into the field and gleaned, collecting the leftovers after the harvesters. She happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. They say there is no such thing as a coincidence, but a God instance. And this is a great example. Out of all the surrounding farms, Ruth, without realising it, ended up on Naomi's relation, Boaz's farm. Boaz's farm. Amazing. Boaz, seen and taking notice of Ruth, inquired from the foreman of the harvesters, "Who is she?" Boaz said to Ruth, "Do not go and glean in another field, and do not go away from this place, but stay here close to my servant girls. I have been made fully aware of all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, and how you left your father and mother and the land of your birth, and how you came to a people you did not know before. May the Lord repay your work, and may you receive a rich reward from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have taken refuge." Ruth said, "May I continue to find favour in your eyes, for you have comforted and spoken kindly to your maidservant. Though I am not like one of your servant girls, why have I found such favour in your eyes, that you should take notice of me, even though I am a foreigner?" After this, Ruth went to Naomi and gave what she had saved from her meal and gave it to Naomi. Then Naomi said to Ruth, "Boaz is a close relative. He is one of our kinsmen redeemers." And Naomi said to Ruth, "It is good for you to work with these young women, so that nothing will happen to you in another field." So Ruth stayed close to the servant girls of Boaz to glean grain until the barley and wheat harvests were finished. She lived with her mother-in-law and was protected. Ruth took an opportunity to tell Boaz that he was a kinsman redeemer, and Naomi said, "Wait until you find out how things go, for he will not rest until he has resolved the matter today." Then Boaz found out there was another relative closer to Naomi, and Boaz said to him, "If you want to redeem the name, do so. But if you will not redeem it, tell me, so I may know, because there is no one but you to redeem it. And I am next after you." The kinsman redeemer was not interested, so declined. Then Boaz said, "I have acquired Ruth as my wife, to raise up the name of the deceased through his inheritance, so that his name will not disappear from among his brothers or from the gate of his home. You are witnesses today." Boaz married Ruth, and they had a son called Obed. Then the women said to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a kinsman redeemer. May his name become famous in Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law Ruth, who loves you and is better to you than 7 sons, has given birth." And Naomi took the child, placed him on her lap, and became a nurse to him. The neighbour woman said, "A son has been born to Naomi," and they named him Obed. It turns out that Obed was King David's grandfather. Boaz was the father of Obed. Obed was the father of Jesse, and Jesse was the father of King David. The book of Ruth is very interesting. Ruth was a Moabite, not a Jew. It shows God's concern for all people, regardless of race, nationality, or status. It starts with Naomi and Ruth experiencing tragedy in their lives, to the extent that Naomi changed her name to Mara, which means bitterness. She felt God had dealt her an unfair hand. She felt God was against her and blamed God, and in due course became bitter. She was totally empty and devastated after losing everything important to her. Naomi had a lot of grieving to process over the years. But events began to change once Naomi arrived in Bethlehem, and Ruth found work. Naomi had a relative on her husband's side, a prominent man of noble character whose name was Boaz. Events began to unfold to her advantage. They say there is no such thing as a coincidence, but a God instance, and this is a great example. Out of all the surrounding farms, Ruth, without realising it, ended up on Boaz's farm. Naomi's relation. Amazing. God had a plan for their lives. God's providence comes into play. Their lives start to change for the better, slowly but surely, through Ruth's chance meeting with Boaz. Boaz saves them by becoming their kinsman redeemer, by marrying Ruth. They then have a child, Obed. They have come through the tragedy and ended up with a new life that would sustain and protect them for the rest of their life. God is mentioned very little in this book, but it shows God's providence at work in the everyday happenings of their individual lives. God is working behind the scenes, weaving all their lives together, using the different situations they are in. Their lives have a purpose because they are a part of God's plan. Naomi's tragedy leads her to think that God is punishing her, but unknown to her, God is restoring her through Ruth's boldness and loyalty, and Boaz's generosity and loyalty. They reclaimed what they had lost, and the emptiness and bitterness were transformed into joy. What an amazing plan God had, and how He used their lives to accomplish His plan. And God does the same thing in our lives today. The most amazing part of the book of Ruth is that through their tragic life experiences, the lineage of David is established through Ruth and Boaz's son, Obed, who is the grandfather of King David and the direct lineage of Jesus. Boaz was the father of Obed. Obed was the father of Jesse, and Jesse was the father of King David. It reminds me of Psalm 55, verse 9. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so my ways are higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. Next painting very, very soon. Watch this space. Until then, remember, God has a plan for your life.